For better or for worse, Edith Farnsworth House is one of the most important architectural landmarks constructed in the 20th century. It was an uncompromised vision of its architect and spawned countless imitations. The minimalist aesthetic came at a heavy cost. Originally designed as a weekend escape tucked away from prying eyes, the home went well over budget, had countless engineering compromises, and turned client and architect against each other. It sent shockwaves throughout the architectural world upon its completion, and it's still reeling from it 70 years later. In this video, we'll cover the conception, construction, and lasting legacy of an icon. To you, this parcel of land in Plano, Illinois might be scenic, if a bit unremarkable. To Dr. Edith Farnsworth, it was a blank canvas. She bought the 9-acre plot from Robert R. McCormick, publisher of the Chicago Tribune, for $500 an acre, with possibilities rushing through her mind. She worked as a nephrologist in the city and wanted to build a weekend getaway where she could escape from the stresses of her job. Buying the land was just one step in this endeavor. Next, she focused her attention on finding someone that could design it. George Fred Keck was a local architect that had dipped his toes in the modernist world. Perhaps his most well-known project was the House of Tomorrow, which was unveiled at the 1933 World's Fair. Trademarks of his style could be seen in its straight edges as well as the extensive use of glass and outdoor elements. He probably would have given Farnsworth's home a similar treatment, but the deal fell through. Keck only would have done it if he were given free rein to do as he wanted. Farnsworth wasn't one to sit on the sidelines, and why should she? Farnsworth changed her mind and set the project aside. Things would get kicked back into gear in 1945. She met another architect at a dinner party, Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. She knew he was a prominent figure in the field, but couldn't tie any buildings to him. Outside of a few architectural circles, he was a relative unknown in the United States. He spent most of his career making a name for himself in Europe. His work before the Second World War included the Barcelona Pavilion and the Villa Tugendhat, which were completed in 1929 and 1930 respectively. These were watershed moments in the modernist movement and actually predated Keck's World's Fair home by several years. Mies could have continued to add to his portfolio, but deteriorating conditions in his native Germany forced him to immigrate to the US in 1938. Farnsworth thought that he was more than capable of handling the project. She told him that she wanted to spend between $8,000 and $10,000 on her weekend home. This isn't an insignificant sum. It would translate to nearly $165,000 in today's money. For her, it was a small price to pay for her home away from home. Mies ran an office in Chicago, and she probably didn't want the man to worry himself over a relatively small project. She asked if there was someone at his firm that could spare the time to work on it. The two of them must have really hit it off during the party because Mies said he'd do it himself, on one condition. Recalling the conversation many years on, he said, "When we talked the first time about the house at that dinner party, I told her that I would not be interested in a normal house, but if it could be fine and interesting, then I would do it." And just like that, they had a deal. The two of them spent 1946 and 1947 going to the site and planning their course of attack. Mies thought the plot was beautiful, though it presented them with a unique problem, if you could even call it that. Architects will usually find the best view on the site and then try to find ways to design the structure around it. The quote-unquote issue was that every view on the plot was sublime. He couldn't emphasize just one. This intertwined with another unique aspect of the acreage. It was shielded very well from prying eyes. Forestry to the north obstructed the view from River Road, and the nearest bridge was a half-mile to the west. A large sugar maple tree would also obscure the house from those on the river to the south. He'd previously discussed making the home out of stone or brick, materials that he'd become innately familiar with during his formative years working in the family business. That simply wouldn't suffice here. During one of their trips to the building site, Mies brought up the idea of making it out of glass. He wanted to bring the outside world into the interior of the structure and ensure that none of the views went to waste. This decision complicated other aspects of the structure. Thermal issues would have made the summer and winter months that much more brutal. Farnsworth wasn't going to be using it every day, but its livability still would have been compromised. The structure's placement became less about making the most of the breathtaking sights and more about mitigating the sun's wrath. Mies detailed the passive solar design, saying, "We placed the house very carefully underneath the trees to cover it as much as possible against the sun. I observed the angle of the shadow at many hours, and we moved the house so close to the trees that we kept the sun as much as possible out in the summer, and we would like the sun in the winter." There was another, more concerning weather-related issue. The desired build site was a mere 75 feet from the Fox River. It was known to overflow from time to time. They didn't have to build the house there. Remember, they had 9 acres of land at their disposal. Farnsworth suggested placing it further up the slope and out of the floodplain, but Mies was determined to make it work in the space that they'd picked out. He did some digging to find out the history of flooding in the area. He would use this information to design some sort of safeguard against it. The Illinois State Water Survey didn't keep such records on hand. They suggested that he interview the locals on the matter. They'd know more about this than anyone else. The testimonials weren't very encouraging. Many of them stated that they'd seen that piece of land underwater. None of this did anything to change his mind on the location. Mies was set on making it work. We'll cover how they tried to work around this a bit later. The excursions to the Plano site were plentiful, but construction wouldn't commence for another 2 years or so. Pretty much the only work done on the house was a watercolor sketch and a handful of plywood models. Mies's office was swamped with work, and the house was set on the back burner. Money was also a major pain point. The $10,000 mark that was thrown out at the dinner party was unrealistic for what they were planning. Farnsworth felt that she needed to make a stronger financial commitment to the project if the house had any hope of being built. She paid Mies a visit at his apartment and put up $40,000 for the cottage. While this did show that she was serious, it still wouldn't be enough to actually build it. She had about $65,000 in assets, but obviously didn't want to spend it all on the house. It was stuck in limbo until May of 1949. Farnsworth received an inheritance of $18,000. This was the spark needed to finally move forward with the weekend home. Cost projections were detailed even further in June. Mies told Myron Goldsmith, one of his employees, to make mock-ups of the house in 3 different sizes and costs. They chose one that was around $60,000. Philip Johnson's glass house was made for around this price, and he thought that it was comparable to their own project. A full 4 years after that fateful dinner party, work would finally begin on the riverside abode. If there's one thing you should know about Mies van der Rohe, it's that he's a perfectionist. This was best illustrated when a contractor came up to Plano to grade the site. Mies wanted a grade that was within 1/10 of an inch. If you aren't familiar with this kind of work, just know that this is a ludicrously precise measurement. The contractor couldn't believe what he was hearing. The situation escalated from there and ended with the man telling Mies to, go south for the winter. Many contractors didn't want to touch the project because of its unusual nature, and those that felt they were up to the challenge were scared off by the architect. With no one else willing to take on the job, he had no choice but to take on the role himself. Construction officially commenced in May of 1949. In an effort to skirt the flooding threat, they decided to place the house 5 feet 3 inches off the ground. This was about 2 feet higher than the flood height that the locals gave him. The minimalist execution fit in with everything else about the house. They were attached to the structure by plug welds. Michael Cadwell, a professor at Ohio State University's Knowlton School of Architecture, detailed the process in his paper, Flooded at the Farnsworth House. He says, "Steel erectors first drill the columns and beams and join them with bolts. Then they'd level and square the frame and secure the nuts. Next, they loosen and remove the same bolted connections one at a time and weld the now vacant holes solid. And finally, finishers sand the weld smooth. There isn't any apparent evidence of welding. The support beams appear to effortlessly lift the structure off the ground. It complements the home's clean lines and is vital to establishing the minimalist motif. The glass was another integral part of the house. The Pittsburgh Plate Glass Company brought massive panels to the building site and cut them down to size on the spot. The quarter-inch thick windows were originally meant for storefronts. In their intended environment, they'd showcase merchandise and lure in passers-by. In this context, they'd call nature into the interior. Interestingly, Mies decided against using double-pane glass. It cost several times as much as standard glass sheets and wasn't as widely available. The aesthetics were in order, but more critical aspects of the structure still needed to be sorted out. Elevating the home off of the ground meant that they couldn't install the utilities in a conventional way. A 4-foot cylindrical tube, or stack, brought in electricity, heating oil, and water, and also expelled waste. The power lines were placed underground. While this preserved the house's clean lines, it also increased construction costs. The flooring was one of the most contentious issues of the construction process. Limestone, concrete, tile, and bluestone were considered, but Mies insisted on using travertine. He was innately familiar with the material. It was used extensively in the Barcelona Pavilion. After work on this project ended, he would go on to incorporate it into works such as the Seagram Building and 860-880 Lakeshore Drive. He even used it in his own Berlin apartment. There was just one problem. Travertine was incredibly expensive. Alex Beam, the author of Broken Glass, says that the cost of the material for this project was between $12,000 and $13,000. Mies knew of its extravagant price and initially tried to see if his brother could supply it for them at a reasonable price. This deal fell through, so he had to get it from a firm in Carthage, Missouri. This came with its own set of complications. Ice could expand in its pores and cause damage. To combat this, Mies designed a drainage system that resembled a shower pan. The terrace was even tilted at a slight angle toward the river to keep water from sitting on the property. They also installed an inlaid radiant heating system, which cost an additional $850. It was definitely a stressful build process, but the end result was truly an architectural marvel. Visitors approached the house from the south. Many elements on the exterior emphasize its orthogonal lines. Verticality dominates in the lower terrace and main level. The two staircases play into this as well. They lack railings and are essentially flat slabs of stone. These are somewhat countered by the upright supports. All of this is in stark contrast to the natural, organic shapes that surround it. The interior is one large room that measures 55 by 28 square feet. It's a true open floor plan because there are no walls that break it up. This echoes the seamlessness of the outdoors and helps to merge the two environments. Mies uses the large core in the center of the house to section off the interior. When visitors enter the house, they'll find themselves in between two sectors. To the right is a work area, and to the left is a dining space. The home makes use of Mies-designed furniture, but it wasn't always this way. He sent a shipment of furnishings to the home back when it was being worked on. Dr. Farnsworth turned them away and opted to use pieces of her own choosing. It wasn't until after it left her ownership that the Mies furnishings were put in place. Let's continue down the right side of the house. Here, we find ourselves in a kitchen with some rather unusual proportions. Countertops, cabinets, and a few utilities are arranged in strips alongside the service core. At the far end of the house is the sleeping area, a living space complete with ottomans, leather chairs, a lounger, and a fireplace is right around the corner. Finally, the house has two bathrooms stowed away at the front and rear of the core. The guest bathroom has a standing shower while the master bathroom has a tub. Edith Farnsworth House is a staple of modernist architecture, but as a space to be lived in, it leaves a bit to be desired. The use of glass is integral to bringing the outside in, but it also made the home scorchingly hot in the summer and unbearably cold in the winter. An air conditioning system was not installed. Granted, the technology hadn't been widely adopted in the 40s and 50s, but if any house could have used it, it was this one. Instead, it had to make do with a combination of boilers and fans. There was also a small set of hopper windows at the east end of the house. This system was wholly inadequate for controlling the house's temperature. It also didn't help that it was poorly ventilated. This played a part in its inability to withstand the elements and made using the fireplace a chore. It could cause a negative interior pressure. The house would pull air through the chimney, filling it with smoke. These thermal issues were reflected in her outrageous heating bills. From the fall of 1951 to the spring of 1952, they totaled $668, which would translate to over $7,500 in today's money. There was little privacy despite its relatively isolated location. Architects and students would visit the site during and a bit after the construction phase, often at the invitation of Mies. Then they just never stopped coming. It seemed like everyone in the architectural world wanted to lay eyes on the newest Miesian masterwork. The seclusion that they worked so hard for was for naught. She could at least take solace in the fact that the home hadn't gotten washed away by the Fox River. Yet. The most stressful issue for both Mies and Dr. Farnsworth was money. Building costs had far exceeded even their most pessimistic estimations. The Korean War had jacked up the price of essential materials such as steel and concrete. It also took up a large portion of their time. What began as a side project for Mies turned into something that he and his associates couldn't escape from. Billable hours had swelled to just under 5,900. On August 1st, 1950, the firm informed her that they'd spent $69,868.80 on the home. Up to this point, she spent about $69,000. A week after receiving the letter, she wrote back to them saying that she wouldn't dedicate anything past the figure listed on the statement. Although she did continue to pour money into the house, this did show that she was getting a bit fed up. Worse still, they had yet to factor in the fees for Mies's architectural and contracting services. According to Mies van der Rohe, a critical biography by Franz Schultz and Edward Windhorst, not listing professional fees was consistent with his past practice. Still, it's crazy to think that compensation in this regard hadn't come up in the 5 years they spent working together. In spite of the never-ending delays, unconventional design solutions, agonizing perfectionism, and conversation about migration patterns, the house had got into a state where Edith could at least spend the night there. She paid the Plano estate a visit on New Year's Eve in 1950. Although work on the home continued into March, she was at least able to finally enjoy her home away from home. Mies and Dr. Farnsworth had stopped talking to each other after their communications in August of 1950. The construction process had strained their relationship beyond repair, and with the house en route to completion, they had little reason to keep in contact. Much to their dismay, their business wasn't finished quite yet. The catalyst that reignited the feud was unassuming enough. Mies complained to fellow architect Philip Johnson about his office's financial struggles. Johnson recommended Robert Wiley, a business consultant and real estate development partner of his, to see if anything could be done. Wiley scoured the books and found a $4,500 balance due for construction costs on a project. He suggested that Mies try to collect the money. He thought he discovered the root of their issues, but he actually stepped on a landmine. This was the amount owed on the Farnsworth house. Wiley got in touch with her attorney, Randolph Bower, but couldn't come to an agreement. He then convinced Mies to meet him in person. Here, the architect said that if Farnsworth paid the $4,500 tab, then he'd waive any professional fee and consider the matter closed. Her camp said they'd be willing to settle for $1,500. They were too far apart to come to a deal. Wiley put Mies through Sonnenschein, Bergson, Lottman, Levinson, and Morse. I'll just call them SBL from here on out. They pushed him to sue. This wouldn't be your typical court case. The plaintiff and defendant would lay their cases out to a special master. This person would then submit a report to a judge that detailed recommendations in regard to how it should be ruled. Boer would continue to represent her through the case. SBL, meanwhile, handed the case off to litigator John Faisler. He argued that Mies was owed about $3,500 for unpaid out-of-pocket labor costs, as well as another $16,600 for his architectural and contracting services. Even though Mies and Farnsworth had never formally discussed the latter fee, Faisler argued that they had a contract, quote, partly expressed and partly implied. Boer laid out a countersuit. He claimed that Mies had mishandled the construction of the house. He argued that it could have been built at that original $40,000 price point, but the architect was more focused on creating his next masterpiece than designing a house. The unusual construction methods and lavish materials sent construction costs into the stratosphere. What for? He said that Mies intentionally kept the rising cost of the project away from its client. Boer sought $35,000, which roughly split the difference between the $40,000 quote and what she'd already spent on the home. Initial hearings began on May 23, 1952, and went until July 3rd. Final oral arguments, meanwhile, weren't made until 1953. Special Master Nelson didn't get around to submitting the report to Judge Harry C. Daniels until the May of the following year. It took this out of Faisler on many points and concluded that Mies was entitled to nearly $13,000. It would be dragged out for a few more years. Judge Daniels sat on the case for 2 years without issuing a final ruling. It was then passed down to another judge who wanted the two parties to come to some kind of agreement. 2 weeks of negotiations followed, but neither one of them wanted to give any ground. Mies eventually cracked. The suit wore him down, and he wanted nothing more than to be done with it. He confided with David Levinson, a senior partner at SBL, and told him that he'd be willing to settle for nothing, quote, if she would just stop slandering us. Levinson, ever the litigator, pointed to the favorable Masters report and said Mies had to get something out of the case. Boer was on vacation, so Faisler's team spoke with his son Mason. They suggested $2,500. This essentially split the difference between Mies's original request of $4,500 and Farnsworth's counter of $1,500. They accepted, and the two of them were out of each other's lives for good. Dr. Farnsworth didn't let the drawn-out legal battle color her experience with the home. She enjoyed it for about 20 years, and she could have had many more years with it if it weren't for some developments in the area. The county planned on replacing the Fox River Bridge with a new one that would be much closer to the home. She tried a few things to get the county to change its mind. First, she tried to have 2 acres of the property turned over to the state after Native American artifacts were found near the house. She submitted the bid to the Illinois Department of Conservation, but they never got back to her. She then said she'd turn the property over as a park if the bridge were called off. The county turned her down. For her final argument, she said that the house and land were an important work and that the bridge would disrupt it. Dr. Farnsworth wanted $250,000 in damages for the acreage that would be taken away from her, but ultimately settled for $17,000. She took this as a sign to finally let go of the house. She put it up for sale in the classified section of the Chicago Tribune and hoped that someone with ample amounts of money and patience would take it off of her hands. Now let's pivot for just a moment. In 1967, real estate developer Peter Palumbo commissioned Mies van der Rohe to take on the Mansion House project in London. While this project was underway, he visited Mies's grandson, Dirk Lohan, and asked if the architect would have any interest in making a house for him in Scotland. Lohan thought that if Palumbo wanted a Mies-designed residence so badly, then he could forego the construction process and buy Farnsworth House outright. He got in touch with Edith and purchased the house for $120,000. They made the deal in 1968, but the two of them agreed that she'd stay in the house until 1971. When the time finally came, she moved to Italy and pursued poetry. She remained here until her passing in 1977. Palumbo, like Farnsworth, used the house as an occasional getaway. His primary residence was in London, so it would have been unfeasible for him to maintain the property on his own. As a result, he hired a full-time caretaker to look over the house while he was away. He made a few changes to the property while it was under his ownership. The old furniture was done away with and replaced with Mies-designed pieces it was originally conceived with. The addition of air conditioning went a long way in making it more bearable during the summer months. Palumbo didn't have to fight with Mies for creative control or defend himself in court, but his time owning the home wasn't without its headaches. It experienced a catastrophic flood in July of 1996 when the area got 18 inches of rain in a 24-hour period. 2 glass panels gave way to the rushing waves, letting nearly 5 feet of water into the interior. The service core was critically damaged, and many pieces of furniture were lost forever. Some eyewitness accounts even say that an Andy Warhol could be seen floating down the river. It cost about $500,000 to get it back in order. Palumbo's declining health motivated him to sell the property around the turn of the millennium. He decided to go through an auction house. This sent Chicago representatives and architectural enthusiasts into a frenzy. There was a possibility that someone could buy the house and move it to another state. There were rumblings that some suitors wanted to relocate it to Pennsylvania or Wisconsin. One party even wanted to build a subdivision. Fortunately, a collective was able to purchase the home for $7.5 million. The funds were pulled together by the National Trust, the Landmarks Preservation Council of Illinois, and over 350 donors. Some of them were only able to pitch in a few dollars. Others put in hundreds of thousands of dollars. A New York Times article from December 2003 says that 30 people gave over $250,000. One person came in at the last moment and offered to give that amount as well. By the time the phone call was over, he ended up pledging 3 times that amount. Edith Farnsworth House was open to the public in 2004, and over 10,000 guests visited annually. Guided tours are performed throughout most of the year, and exhibitions explore the wider history and impact of the home. In fact, there are several events underway as I've recorded this video. Presentations on Peter Palumbo, Mies van der Rohe, and Roger Brown are going on through the end of 2023. This isn't an ad or anything, but it's pretty cool, and I think you should check it out. The most serious threat to the house has been, without a doubt, the increase in floods in the area. There was at least one serious event while it was under Farnsworth's ownership. It flooded in 1954, and she had to make a daring escape on a paddle boat with her violin and poodle in tow. Incidents like this have only increased in the last 30 years. It flooded a mere year after the ruinous event in 1996. The subsequent renovations rang up for $250,000. The most recent serious event happened in 2008, when weather conditions put the floor under 18 inches of water. With the onset of increased urbanization and climate change, these incidents will, unfortunately, become more common in the future. It might seem like a fool's errand to save the home in the face of conditions like these, but there just might be a solution on the horizon. The trust began working with the architectural firm Robert Silliman Associates on the issue. They presented the trust with a variety of options. RSA proposed everything from permanently elevating the house up to moving it to another location. Other, more bizarre solutions included a complex barrier system and a strange buoyancy setup that would literally see the home float in the event of a flood. None of the aforementioned ideas appealed to them, as they were either unrealistic or too far removed from Mies's original intent. They settled on a hydraulic-based system that could raise the house temporarily during a flood. It appealed to the trust because the core experience would remain intact. They wouldn't have to relocate it or install some intrusive mechanism. Visitors would be none the wiser. In this plan, the home would be placed elsewhere temporarily while the new system is installed. The lower terrace would also be essentially severed from the rest of the structure. The upper portion would be raised from its standard position by up to 8 feet when floods come. A 2020 article from architects.org quotes Ben Rosenberg, a principal engineer at RSA. He said the house will take between 30 and 90 minutes to raise, depending on the final design. This would be more than enough time for them to react to floods, which Rosenberg says can be anticipated days in advance. It's an intriguing solution, though I'm only giving a brief overview of it. Robert Stillman gave a more in-depth explanation at a Chicago conference in 2014. You can find it in the description if you're interested. It's also a long ways out from actually being implemented. The system is part of a larger $10 million renovation plan that is intended to return the home back to like new. We can only hope that Edith Farnsworth House endures so that it can inspire generations to come.